Good to be with you all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Colin. I'm one of the elders, and I have the privilege of kicking off a new web series for you all. And this series is in recognition of Black History Month. This is an important time where we collectively acknowledge the accomplishments and the brilliance of Black people. Black History Month is the fruit of the work that was put in by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was an incredible scholar and historian, who essentially launched Negro History Week in 1926. It was in his book, his well-known book, The Miseducation of the Negro, that Dr. Woodson argued this point. And he said, to handicap a student by teaching them that their Black face is a curse and that their struggle to change their condition is hopeless. And he called that the worst kind of lynching. And so, in other words, what Dr. Woodson is saying here is that the lack of knowledge or the lack of truth can lead to the acceptance of false narratives. I mean, Christ our King, if we think about this, you all, this sounds very consistent with Scripture, because it's in Hosea 4:6, which says, my people perish from a lack of knowledge. Negro History Week, it eventually became Black History Month in 1976, and to this day, it continues to be a means by which knowledge and truth is shared. And so for the next 4 weeks, you all, we're going to be dropping episodes that introduce lesser known individuals whose contributions are monumental. I mean, we hear so much about MLK, we hear so much about Malcolm X, we hear so much about Harriet Tubman, we hear so much about Rosa Parks. But what we want to do is we want to introduce those who we may not be familiar with, whose contributions were monumental. And so today, as a psychology professor, I have the privilege to introduce to you all two of my heroes, and that's Doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark. Doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark. I'm a Hampton man, right? And so this pains me to say, but Kenneth and Mamie Clark were Howard University educated. It's all good. They were taught by and mentored by Dr. Francis Cecil Sumner, who was the first African American to get a PhD in psychology. They got married, they eloped very early while they were in college, and then they would go on to study in graduate school at Columbia University. They were trained psychologists who particularly, you all, had an interest in studying the psychological effects of racism and segregation on Black children. We're talking the 1930s and 1940s, when they're very active. And so they're known particularly for conducting two experiments that captured these psychological effects that they were interested in studying. And so in one particular study, they administered a coloring test to about 160 Black children between the ages of 5 and 7 years old. Each of these children, they were given paper, they were given a box of crayons, and then one of the tasks that was given to the children was to color a picture of a boy or girl in the same way that they look. What the Clarks discovered was that these children often color these pictures to be lighter than they really are. And so ultimately, these young children at the ages of 5, the young ages of 5, 6, and 7, had already begun to view their dark skin as a problem. A second study, which is perhaps the most famous one, is known as the doll experiment. I don't know if you've been to the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. If you have not, please go. But the Clarks, you all, have an exhibit in that museum, and you'll notice that in their exhibit, you'll see these doll babies, okay? And these particular doll babies were used in this experiment where they presented two dolls to a group of Black children. The dolls were the same. One was Black, one was white. And as they're presenting these dolls to these children, the children are being asked a series of questions. Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll would you like to play with? And then perhaps the most impactful question was this one. Which doll do you look like? And so what they saw was that everything favorable, good, nice, the one you would like to play with, these children didn't pick up the doll that looked like them. They picked up the white doll. And everything that was inherently negative, especially the last question, which one looks like you, they picked up the black doll. And so to a previous point with the coloring test, these results are arguing that these children at very young ages are receiving some kind of social message, you all, which is transforming the way in which they view themselves and people who look like them. What's interesting about this doll experiment, you all, is that CNN re-administered this test in a different way in the year 2010. Because the perception is that after 2008, the election and inauguration of President Barack Obama, surely after having a black president and a black first lady, a beautiful black family in the White House, surely now black children will think better of themselves. And what they found was that results were similar in 2010 as they were in the 30s and 40s when Doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark were doing their research study. So we're talking incredible work accomplished by the Clarks. But there's an important question that we have to ask. All of this data, all of this information, what did they do with it? Well, come with me to the year 1954. And now we see Brown versus Board of Education, which was a groundbreaking Supreme Court case that was argued by none other than Thurgood Marshall, an attorney for the NAACP at the time. Thurgood Marshall, we know, would go on to become the first black Supreme Court justice, arguing about 32 cases before the US Supreme Court and winning about 29 of them. Incredible record. Well, in Brown versus Board of Education, here we have the Clarks, Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark, using their research data and offered expert witness testimony in this case as to the psychological effects that racism and segregation has on black children. And if we know our history, we know that it was Brown versus Board of Education that eventually overturned the concept of separate but equal, a law that had been in place since Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Christ our King, please join me in celebrating the life and the work of Doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark. But there's more to come, so please stay tuned. Grace and peace to you, family.